Good evening, everyone. We begin tonight with President Biden, who is just moments away from giving a speech in Detroit, Michigan. When that speech begins, we will bring it to you live. Joining me now is Aaron Haynes, MSNBC contributor and editor-at-large for the 19th, Fernand Amandi, Democratic pollster and strategist and MSNBC political analyst, and David Jolly, former Republican congressman and MSNBC political analyst. Thank you all for being here. Ann, I'm going to start with you. It feels in some ways like there is nothing that President Biden can do to sort of stop this train that's gone out of the station from some members of his party and from some in the media. But what do you expect him to do tonight? And at this stage, what does it get him?
Yeah, I mean, more than 2 weeks out from this debate, we are still kind of watching President Biden's appearances, not necessarily for the issues that he is going to raise, but for what his delivery might look like, and trying to figure out if, in fact, certainly the Democratic voters still, many of them are with him and believe that he is electable, but that is not where some members of the party are. There is definitely, he's not doing much to kind of quell fears among some members in Congress and others that he is still the person for the job, even though he is insisting on staying in this race. And so that is what he is going to continue to do, to make that case here, probably in Detroit. Michigan, obviously a must-win state for Democrats. And but, you know, you don't have folks like the popular governor of Michigan in town to kind of, even though she has signaled her support for him, she's not there tonight. So that crowd, it certainly looks robust. If they are enthusiastic, I think that is maybe yet another signal, at least to President Biden, that he needs to stay in this race, and that the voters, he's hearing from people on the ground in these 2 weeks since the debate, and he says that these voters are affirming over and over again that they're with him, regardless of what other establishment Democrats are saying right now.
You know, David, yeah, I mean, I've been watching, CNN's been doing a bunch of MOSs, and I've seen some MOSs, you know, from other places as well, and they seem pretty consistent, particularly when people are talking to voters of color. They're saying, yeah, no, we want Trump out, and we're committed. So, you know, I haven't seen anecdotally a lot of this coming from the actual voters or people who have to vote in the election. It definitely feels like it's coming from the professionals in the party. I haven't seen any evidence that it's voters that are in a panic over President Biden.
Joy, I agree with you. The debate over Joe Biden is over, but for Democratic professionals inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. The polls have shown us that things have stabilized for the president. He has told us he's in. You're seeing him at a rally tonight. You saw him lead a successful NATO conference this week. This debate is over. And so you're either working for Joe Biden to get reelected, or you're working against him. And it's really that simple. I'm not quite sure what Democrats think they're going to get out of the next week. If Joe Biden had indicated he was reconsidering, fine, have this family conversation. But you're having a family conversation without the president. All you're doing is handicapping him. And all of this time, we could be prosecuting a case against the criminal nominee. You have a criminal nominee in Donald Trump against an incumbent Joe Biden who is aging. Are Democrats really concerned that Joe Biden is more dangerous than Donald Trump, that they have to work on the public airwaves and on TV and radio and through public statements to try to push out Joe Biden? When Republicans are nominating a criminal, you have a nominee in Donald Trump who wants to roll back democracy, and in Joe Biden, one who wants to defend it. In Donald Trump, somebody who wants to roll back your personal freedoms. In Joe Biden, somebody who wants to protect them. And Democrats are having a public conversation about picking out Joe Biden, and it's only the Washington inside the Beltway Democrats. I get the anxiety of all the voters. We all feel it. We do. I felt it. I was unsettled by the debate. I raised questions. Should Joe Biden stay in this race or not? But he told us he is. He's in it. There's no other conversation to be had. The debate is over. Joe Biden's on the campaign trail tonight. So you're either fighting for Joe Biden or you're fighting against him. It's that simple. And the last people to understand that seem to be everybody living in Washington, D.C., who gets paid to be a Democratic consultant or a Democratic member of Congress.
Well, I'll tell you, next week, if the conversation 1,000% among Democrats is not about that crazy convention that's going to be taking place among Republicans, in which it's going to be, you know, OnlyFans stars and such on stage, and them pitching Project 2025 to turn us into The Handmaid's Tale, then nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's completely incompetent. And I think at this point, next week, I think the conversation will hopefully will be about that. Fernand, let's talk first of all about Michigan. This is a very important state. Obviously, it's a must-win state. There are these three must-win states for Democrats: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. No Democrat really at this point can win without all three. Talk about Michigan. Where does it stand? Where did it stand pre-debate? Where does it stand now? Because it seems like a lot of the sort of fundamentals in the swing states are pretty much the same.
Well, Joy, Michigan is probably the centerpiece, if you will, the crown jewel of that blue wall. It's a state that, frankly, if Biden and the Democrats do not hold it in November, the math becomes almost impossible. And that's why you see so much time being spent there. We saw it, of course, manifest in 2016, again in 2020. And if Michigan is in any way on the fringes, the Democrats are going to have to do their very best to fortify that. Now, the good news is there is 4 months to still do that. And just to echo Congressman Jolly's point from earlier, I think it was appropriate that following the debate performance, questions were raised, discussions were had. Those conversations and those discussions are now coming quickly to the point of no return. And for all of us in America watching, we have to realize they're above our pay grade. This is a decision that Joe Biden has made. And if he is going to be the Democratic nominee going forward in a week or two, that's going to be an official sanctioned thing. Democrats need to get back all of them, volunteers, operatives, voters, on the trail to do whatever they can to fortify states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Because if those crumble, Joy, there is really no path to 270. And that's why you see President Biden there tonight, even while his campaign is going through all of these discussions and turmoil in that critical state of Michigan. And he's going to be there a lot between now and November because it's the one state the Democrats cannot afford to lose, Joy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, Aaron, there is this, all the sort of, I've been getting all the emails with all the sort of the fantasy scenarios, et cetera. None of this, all of that is moot. There are rules in the Democratic Party. There is a very important date coming up, which is July 21st, which is when you have this virtual balloting among the delegates. That is when Joe Biden, who goes into that with nearly 3,900 pledged delegates, or about 700 some on unpledged delegates, or sort of uncommitted delegates. That's it. There's simple rules. There is no separate town hall strategy where you do different primaries. Nope. There's a vote on that date. And then if President Biden then, as expected, gets more than 1,976 delegates, he's the nominee. There is no alternate procedure to change that. So at this stage, this is a moot point unless he, on his own, for whatever reason, or, through some other mechanism, decides that he's not running. And then there is this other conversation that then comes in because the fantasy football is also involving who else? Well, there is no who else. There's Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States. That's literally her job as vice president, to be next in line. What do you make of the fact that the fantasy talk has included someone besides her? Because that seems to me to be self-defeating and, frankly, insane.
Look, that's basically what I wrote back in November when, President Biden said, again, he was running for re-election, and there was talk of possibly replacing Vice President Kamala Harris on the ticket then. And what I wrote in November was that Black women were not having that in November. It would be suicide for Democrats to throw Vice President Kamala Harris over the side for whatever reason, because she is literally the sitting vice president and is also somebody that is seen as an asset to the ticket, particularly by Black voters. And so this is certainly not a new conversation, but I guess it's a conversation that's not really going away because here we are again in the post-debate disaster era, still kind of talking over and around the vice president, who was one of his swiftest and staunchest supporters in the hours immediately after the debate and in the 2 weeks since. She has been out on the campaign trail making the case for people who think that she's been finding her lane or finding her voice in the 2 weeks since this debate. I mean, welcome to, covering the vice president. This is who she has been. She has been calling out Trump by name for the past at least several months, calling him out on, tying him directly to the fall of Roe and the loss of reproductive rights for millions of women. And she has been making the case, that a Trump presidency, is just really not an option. She's been resonating with women, with young people, with those key constituencies that Democrats need to shore up, right, over the next 4 months. And we've seen her do that. I mean, Joy, we were at Essence. We saw in New Orleans. We saw the reaction that she was getting from those Black women who are in support of President Biden, in part because of his Vice President Kamala Harris, right? The Biden-Harris ticket is what they're supporting. And then you saw her again at her sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, the convention in Dallas, making a pitch to her sorority sisters to get mobilized, to get organized. They heard that call. They're ready to work. You saw her in Greensboro also this week against the backdrop of the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, talking about the people in that community and the duty that they have had in their democracy and calling on them again to do their duty for their country come November. So, you know, she has really been an asset on this campaign trail in these last 2 years. She was an asset in the midterms. They think she's going to be an asset between now and November. So any talk of jettisoning her in any capacity is certainly a non-starter with all of the Black women that I have talked to and other people in the Democratic Party who do see her as an asset.
Well, in addition to that, and Fernanda, I mean, you've got the numbers. I mean, Ben Dixon and Amandi, one of the best polling firms ever. You guys just recently did the numbers. I mean, she actually outpolls Joe Biden. I mean, in the numbers that you guys put out this week. I mean, she's actually a huge asset. She's also a huge asset. We have the news today that both Hamas and Israel have accepted the framework that President Biden and the administration have put out in terms of trying to get a peace deal. She's actually helpful to him on college campuses on that issue. And obviously the big issue, of course, reproductive rights. Like, she's the spokesperson for that. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, if people are saying, well, she would be a great option, she's already an option. She's on the ticket.
Well, she is indeed. And to your point, Joy, our opinions don't matter. It's what the data tells us. And the data is speaking very clearly this week. Kamala Harris is not just viable. She's ahead. She's winning, as you point out. She's within the margin of error on every single poll I've seen. She's actually pulled ahead in a couple, including the one we released this past week. So I think any talk that suggests she's not going to be on the ticket is crazy talk, and that talk needs to end.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.